recording. So what did we learn yesterday?
Well, I learned more in depth with inner HTML of um how it gets the I think it gets the the I no, not the ID but the actual uh
HTML element,
yeah,
and it can do it through ID. Yep.
I learned that it gets like the information through that, and then you're able to um put stuff on like the JavaScript and make it like where like it like if you if the thing is like zero, and then you can make it like turn into one and stuff.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the requests on the 30-second feedback form is, okay, you keep on saying DOM, right? What is the document object model? How does it relate to this project? And I think that that's a really good question, right? So the document object model is basically the bridge between our HTML and our CSS. So whenever we say anything in our JavaScript that starts with document dot, that is basically when we cross the bridge for the first time, right? That is what is reaching into our HTML, retrieving some information and shoving it into the JavaScript. But that bridge is two ways, right? So let me pull up that code as an example.
Did you mean to say the bridge between HTML and CSS or HTML and JavaScript?
HTML and JavaScript. Did I say CSS?
Yeah,
My
CSS. I was
bad.
like, hold on.
My bad. HTML and JavaScript, the bridge is between. Although it is also between, it can update the CSS as well. But the document object model is primarily HTML and JavaScript. Sorry, not CSS. Thank you for clarifying that. So right here, we say document. What do we mean by document? We mean our HTML document, right? That document is what all of our HTML has in it. So whenever we say get element by ID, get elements by tag name, whenever we do anything like that, we are bridging the divide. We're reaching into our HTML and getting something out. In this case, we are getting this div ID screen. And then we store it in a JavaScript variable, right? We say const screen, break the divide, pause out of JavaScript, use JavaScript to reach into our HTML and store it in this thing called screen. Now we're in JavaScript world. But in JavaScript world, we don't write HTML, right? We don't have these tags. We can't add attributes. We can't change the contents of things. So in order to do that, there is a model that converts the HTML into a JavaScript object, right? That's why we say document, okay, HTML document, object. What's an object? Those are key value pairs, right? So that key value pair, well, what happens if we make an object, right? And we've used this example before. We've said const car make is Toyota and model is RAV4. And what happens if we want to update some of the properties on that object? Well, we can say, hey, the car.make is now equal to Prius. Okay, an object key value pairs. We're able to use the key to change the value of that. So now if we console log out our car.make, we would get car.model. Bad. We would get Prius coming out of that. Well, it turns out that whenever we do this get element by ID, not only is it finding this div ID screen, but the document object model is giving us access to a ton of different properties. One of those properties is inner HTML. So now when we take this JavaScript string, right, this 0, and shove it into the inner HTML, what it's doing is reaching into our HTML document and changing the contents of the screen right here. Let's actually see that in action. So when we are in here and we say 9 minus 6 equals 3, okay, great. But what we are able to do, because we have attached this clear button function to the clear button right here, when we click this, not only is this car going to run, or this code going to run, which we can prove by actually hitting the clear button and seeing the word Prius come out, but we're also reaching back into the HTML document and using that inner HTML, which is a property that the document object model provides to us, to set that equal to 0, which is exactly what is happening here. So the document object model is basically the bridge between the HTML in the JavaScript that allows our JavaScript to reach into the HTML and update different properties like inner HTML in order to change what our HTML is reflecting. And we can actually see that because we interact with the DOM whenever we type a number or click on a button there. We can actually look at the HTML. If I can get this displaying properly. And we can see the screen is saying 9. Well, why is the screen saying 9 when we started the div ID screen at 0? Well, that is because in our button clicked method down here, we accessed the screen, we figured out whatever the number clicked was, and then we modified the screen's inner HTML, the HTML between the two div tags, to include whatever number that was clicked on. How are we feeling about document object model? We're not going to know every property of it, right? We interface the document object model in kind of two primary ways here. Not only did we use it to update the contents of the screen, but we also used it down here. We also said, hey, go get all of the buttons. Go into our HTML document, pull out every time we had a button tag. What did that do? That retrieved an array of every single one of these buttons. Then we looped over all of the buttons using JavaScript, right? Not document object model, not anything fancy here, other than we're looping over each individual thing. And as we're looping over those buttons, we checked to see what was inside those buttons. And we said, hey, for the equal button and the clear button, we want you to do a different function. We want you to do the equal clicked or the clear button function when an on-click event happened. Well, how else can we attach an on-click event? We actually could come up here and say, hey, for the button, when it is on-clicked, when an on-click event happens, go run the equal clicked function. That would achieve the exact same thing. But we would then have to put an on-click on every single function. So instead of our HTML reaching out to the JavaScript through the document object model, instead what we did is went into our JavaScript, reached into our HTML, got all of the buttons out, used the inner HTML property to see which button we actually had for each time this loop ran, and then attached a function to the onClick. So basically what we did is we said when this button is clicked on, based off of which button is inner HTML it is, we can then attach this function so that equal clicked here, or clear button here, or button clicked here, all of these functions, each one of these blocks of code will run based off of what button what the button's contents were. All right. Who is like, I get the concept of document object model, but I need more practice with it? And who is like, I still don't get it, I'm confused.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I just need more practice. That's what I was doing last night. So what I did was I took your code from GitHub, but except I kept all the comments, but I deleted all the code so I could like actually like practice like knowing how to build, the calculator app and whatnot. So that's that. I don't know everybody do that, but that's just the way I like do things if I really want to dive in is the be more hands-on stuff. So I realized that I learned better like that. So
Absolutely. And that's just like the document and object model. You can do that two ways, right? You can delete out all the code and just leave the comments and try and rewrite the code in the right order so that you can get the practice with the syntax, or you can do that in reverse. You can leave all the code and delete all the comments and just try and write the comments in a way to say, hey, can I explain what this line of code is doing? Because oftentimes when we write this code, there are 19 different ways that we can write it. And when one of the benefits of having these guest instructors come in is Ryan is going to show you how he understands JavaScript, how he writes this JavaScript. Does that mean his version is better than mine? Arguably, yes, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? As long as the code is running, as long as it is doing what we expect as users, then there is no necessarily better or worse. There may be a slightly more efficient way for the computer, but what's more important is that we understand it as developers, right? We understand this to the point of saying, I can describe this to someone else. If someone read this code and was like, I don't understand what this line is doing, as a author of that code, could you explain that to someone else? And that's the level that we want to shoot for. It isn't, could I make this from scratch? That's what we will work our way up to, right? That's when you graduate and when you have your capstone and you can say, look at what I've built. Sure, I'm going to have some help from Max building this. Sure, I'm going to have my mentors weighing in on it, but I can tell you how it works. I can break down all of those different components and say, this is how that code is executing. And that's the level we want to shoot for. But we're in week 2 of JavaScript. We got 3 more weeks after this, right? So I don't want you guys panicking right now. You're 2/5 of the way through this. We are almost done with all of the new concepts. Sure, every project's going to pepper something in, right? Where you're like, oh, we haven't done that before. But every single project from here until we get to React, you're going to get practice with the document object model. You're going to get practice with more variables. You're going to get more practice with loops, right? All of those things are coming down the road. So I don't want you to panic quite yet, but I do want you thinking, you know what? Syntax is what I'm struggling with, or for loops, or the document object model, or variable types, or functions, right? Because as you hear me saying all of these things, I want you guys keeping a list of, I didn't quite get that, right? And maybe I'm not feeling quite confident enough to ask the question in class, or maybe you are, right? And that's a great time in stand up to go, I reviewed the code last night. I still don't get number 6. Can you explain that like I'm 5? Yes, great question. Or you're going, I'm still not getting it, but I feel like everyone else is. Maybe I need a little bit of practice on that. That's when you go to that resources list. That's when you find what resource works for you, whether it's the PDF cheat sheet, whether it's the 3-hour video on YouTube, whether it's going into free code camp and going, you know what, I need function practice. I'm going to go to the function section in free code camp. I'm not going to do the whole thing. The whole course is like 300 hours, right? Don't need you diving into the whole thing, but I'm going to go find that function section in free code camp and I'm going to go practice there. Whatever resource is clicking for you, that's what I want you to go practice with. But week 2 out of 5, So keep that in mind. We are going to get more and more practice through these projects.
Does free code camp has like lessons for Dom?
Yes. So if you look at the you know what? They changed their curriculum a little bit ago. Yeah, right here. So review DOM manipulation by building rock, paper, scissors game. This is in the JavaScript algorithms and data structures section. If you go down to review DOM manipulation by building a rock, paper, scissors game, you'll see they've got stuff in here like get element by ID and a couple other things in there. Question.
Oh, so it's not so much a question, but just a comment on stand-up, or what we learned. So it was
Yeah.
interesting getting experience on the try catch for error testing. That was really cool to have an example of. And kind of piggybacking off of that, I do have a question about my code. Everything else works. So the error testing also works and all the calculations. It's just that the clear button doesn't. And I just wanted to see if I could share that code really quick.
Absolutely. Go for it. Just a note while you're pulling that up, if anyone is planning to travel outside of the country at any point and is planning on tuning into class, shoot me a message of what country you will be in. We have security set up that basically limits you joining the meeting only to the US, I think Canada and Mexico, just so we don't have literally Russian hackers joining our Zoom meeting unexpectedly. So if you are traveling internationally, just shoot me a Slack message of what country you'll be in. Unfortunately, I can't change that setting while people are in the meeting. So if you give me a heads up, I can adjust that for you so you can join the meeting. I know that sounds really random, but if you are traveling internationally and plan on still joining class, just give me a heads up. Okay, you have a screen.inner HTML, but you are getting the element and storing it in a scren. So look at line 16. It's a scren, not a screen. There you go. And you're good to go. Oh, now, oh,
It's always a typo, but thank you. Appreciate it.
of course. I'm a little slow tonight. This Zoom update is really gonna screw with me. I'm like, they moved my stop participant sharing button. Where did it go?
Are there
Any
common properties that we should know? Are there like common like properties that, because since there's a lot, are there like common
Absolutely.
properties that we should know for like interviews and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think ChatGPT actually had a really good answer for that. Let me see. The one nice thing about a nice thing, there are many nice things about ChatGPT, is it will remember your chat history. So over on the left here, you can see all of the different things that I have asked ChatGPT to do. Things like generating dates, which was easier to do in ChatGPT than it was to do in like Google Sheets, all the way to like authentication, which we will get to down the road. And then some things like data formats and converting them. But anyway, last night, I said, how do I know what DOM properties to use in my JavaScript, right? Because this example showed inner HTML, and I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know that inner HTML is even a thing? And they said, one, understand the HTML, and if you understand the HTML, you can kind of figure out what you're trying to change in your JavaScript, learning it that way. Then they say, well, you got to know what element you're changing. So the one that we've been primarily using is get element by ID, but there are kind of 4 common ways to use the document object model to query what elements we're trying to change. Then it says documentation, of course, but problem with documentation is it's overwhelming, right? They're going to give you all 500 properties the document object model has. So while I think the most important thing is like, hey, I'm trying to change this thing in my JavaScript. How do I do that? That's when the documentation becomes more helpful, because you can say something like, I'm trying to get this JavaScript to run when I click on the event, or when I click on an element, or when I hover over something, or when a scroll happens, or I'm trying to change the style of this element in my JavaScript. How do I do that? That's when the documentation becomes really helpful. And then thanks to the AI here, they said, look, I've analyzed millions of lines of code on GitHub. I know what the document object model is, and here are the ones that I have analyzed to tell you that are the most used. So ones that we have covered: element selection, right? Get element by ID, get elements by tag name. We've started to see those. We see inner HTML and text content, 2 different ways of modifying what is showing up in our HTML. Attributes are referring to the attributes in the HTML element, right? So image is the tag name, but then we see src equals and whatever the source of the image is, or we see style, or we see the label that shows up, or whatever it is, right? Whatever's inside the tag after the tag name itself, those are all considered attributes. Styles is a very common thing to update through the document object model, right? Hey, the user clicked on this thing, so we want to show that as clicked by changing the color of the link. Or, oh, maybe we want to add a border if something was clicked on, or something like that. Event handling, which is what's an event? That's some user interaction, a click, a scroll, a hover, mouse movement. All of that is considered an event, basically something the user is interacting with. And then they said element creation. We haven't gotten too much into these quite yet. When Ryan comes in and does the New York Times project with you guys, you'll see element creation a little bit more. We'll also do element creation using my methods, which are very much string based in the movie theater project, which I believe is coming next week. And then finally, they say just play around with it, right? Try and set some kind of goal. Say, I'm trying to get this thing to show up, or this is what I'm trying to achieve. I know it's something interactive, so it must be in our JavaScript. And because of that, you can kind of dive into it. So hopefully that isn't a cop-out, because AI answered the question for me. But hopefully that gives you a better attack vector, right? Of going, all right, well, these are a good place to start, but at the end of the day, it's just going to be practice, practice, practice.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
I didn't trigger anyone who had a music teacher who was like, the only way to get better is to practice. Well, no, the only way to get better is for you to tell me what I'm doing wrong, and then I'll practice on that. But, Okay, anything else from last night? Anyone's code that isn't working? Any sections of the code that we didn't quite understand? Anyone who wants to burn the calculator to the ground and start a new project? How are we feeling?
New project.
New project. All right. So tonight we are actually revisiting an old project, but don't worry, it is not the calculator. We are revisiting the weather app that we worked on before. And so what we're going to do is interject some interactivity to that weather app and get more practice with an object data type. as well as modifying an existing interface by layering in some JavaScript to make it interactive. So we are going to find our weather code, which is, I got to look at the schedule for that. Sorry, I should have been prepared. We worked on the weather app on week 2, day 3. So we're going to head to our week 2, day 3 project. It is this weather app that we worked on. That's what we're going to build on top of. So we're going to take our week 2, day 3 folder, copy that whole thing, then head to our week 7 folder, go ahead and paste that in. We are going to, ooh, no, we're not. Bad advice. We're going to go to week 2, day 3. We're going to right click on it and duplicate it. And we're going to call this weather. We are then going to move that from our week 2 folder into our week 7 folder. So I right clicked on day 3, I hit duplicate, I renamed that duplication weather, then I moved it into the duplicated folder, I moved it into week 7. Now that I have it in week 7, I'm going to rename it day 4.
You forgot to share your screen.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Week 2, day 3, right click on it, duplicate, rename that weather as a temporary name, drag that into week 7, then rename weather to day 4. And now take that day 4 folder and drag it into VS Code. If we go live on it, you should see the weather app. I will get a live share fired up for you guys. And into the chat. There was a request while you guys are getting set up for working with data from a file. Unfortunately, there are some security requirements in the browser that don't allow us to access a local file easily. Basically, they don't want a website to a developer to be able to reach into your local files and just ingest a file without your permission. So once we get into Node, which is unfortunately about 2 to 3 months away, remind me about that request to pull data in from a local file, because we can do that with Node once we get into the server-side development, and we can talk about how we parse through all of that data. So it is a totally valid request, but unfortunately, one that is much harder to do in the browser than it is to do in back-end development. Okay, now that we've got our files set up, we are in here, we've got all of our interface built already, but we don't have any JavaScript set up yet. So we're going to make a new file called script.js. We will throw a console log in here that says JS linked. We will head over to our index.html, and all the way down at the body, before the closing body tag, we're going to throw a script src in that says, hey, go run script.js. We save. We don't see any changes over here, but whenever we're working on our JavaScript, we should always have our console open. So I right-click inspect, open up the console tab, make sure I see my JS linked, so we know, hey, before we go write a ton of different JavaScript, we know that we can actually have our JavaScript be executing before we get too far down the rabbit hole. Again, that's a new script.js file. We throw a console log JS linked in just so we have some JavaScript that's executing. We go to our index.html. We throw our script tag in for script.js. We head to our browser, right-click inspect, head over to our console tab, and we should be good to go. It's also a keyboard shortcut for opening the console in the web browser. I don't know it off the top of my head, but if you're a keyboard shortcut person, just know that that is out there.
Should be Command L.
Thank you. I knew someone would know it.
I think using Prettier, one of the other extensions, maps over it, so it has multiple. I switched mine to Command Shift L.
Good to know. All right, anyone not get a JS linked? Okay, so there are a couple ways of thinking about this. Basically, what the objective is tonight is to change this up here to be a drop down. So I would like to make it so I can interact with my web page using the document object model, but I want to basically have some data that is still hard-coded, right? We're going to come up with this data in our code, but I would like the user to be able to select a different location based off of a predefined list and see the weather for that specific location. Down the road, we will revisit this project after Ryan comes in and teaches APIs and actually make it load real weather data. So that is coming down the road. But for right now, we want to get practice with two things here. We want to get practice with data structures with our JavaScript. How should we structure this data in a way that makes it easier to load it in and interact with it? And two, we want practice with that document object model, right? We want practice with taking some data in our JavaScript, bridging it into our HTML, and having it reflect on the page. So the first thing that we're going to start with is not actually on the user side of things for once. The first thing that we are going to start with is how do we structure our data in a way that makes it easy to interact with? So the goal is to say, hey, I would like to load in 3 different cities. What data structure do we think of when we think of predefined data that is related to one group of things?
An object.
An object. Now, you may have been thinking an array. An array is fine, but an array is just a list of data, right? That's more of a to-do list, or that's more of a of just, hey, there may be 0 items, there may be 100 items in this list. But because we're grouping it all together, we're going to start with an object. So in our code, we're going to say const weather data. And we're going to start with an object. And the highest level of grouping of this data is going to be the location. Each location is going to have a temperature, a precipitation, and a wind speed. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to start with Manlius. That's going to have a bunch of data. I'm going to say Syracuse, and that's going to have a bunch of data. And I'm going to say San Francisco. And that's going to have a bunch of data. And when I save this, you'll see Prettier kind of strips out quotes here. When we are defining object keys, as long as they don't have a space in them, we don't actually need the quotes around it. But because San Francisco does have a space in it, it doesn't know how to handle that unless we tell it, hey, the object's key is going to have a space in it, so therefore we need to use a quote. So Manlius and Syracuse are technically string data formats, but we don't need those quotes because it doesn't have a space in it. Excuse me. Okay, Now we got to think about inside of that, we are now seeing an object inside of an object. So just like arrays that can hold any different number of data types, an object, the key will always be a string, but the value of that key can be any kind of data type. It can be a string, it can be an array, or in this case, we are doing an object inside of an object. So now I need to think about, well, what kind of data are we storing? We ideally are storing all the different kinds of information that show up on this page. But to get started, we're going to start with 3 different things. We're going to say, hey, the temperature is, I don't know, 65. We're going to say the chance of precipitation is going to be 55%. And the wind speed is going to be 10 miles per hour. Now, why did I put quotes here? Because I wanted to store the unit of that wind speed. So we are using 2 numbers and a string, which are all part of 3 different keys that are stored in an object that is stored in another object with a key of Manlius that is all stored in one big object stored in our weather data. That means a bunch of gobbledygook to you. That is okay. But over time, you're going to keep on hearing me use these vocab words where you go, all right, I'm understanding this a little bit more. We are then going to spell temperature right. Error. Sure. Is that right? And precipitation. Pick the hardest variable names to spell. Once I get that in, I'm going to borrow this entire object, copy it, and paste it down into Syracuse. Syracuse is going to be a little bit warmer and has the 95% chance of precipitation, but no wind. I don't know. I'm just making things up here. And San Francisco is going to be 72 because the weather is always perfect. It has a 5% chance, and it's going to have 15-mile-an-hour winds. I don't know, just as an example. I did spell it wrong, didn't I? Thank you. Precipitation, not precipitation. All right, so check your spellings. Make sure temperature is spelled right. Make sure precipitation is spelled right. San Francisco is a string. Manlius and Syracuse are also both strings as well. However, when we define a key for a value, we don't need to put it into a string unless there is a space in the key. If there is a space in the key, then we do need to use those double quotes. So Manlius and Syracuse are technically still strings, but if the key of the object has a space in it, we need to use those double quotes so it knows where the key is starting and ending. Okay, now we need to practice here because we need to be able to access any different value in this object before we make it interactive, before we get into user input here. So I'm going to practice. I'm going to say console log, and I'm going to pick a random thing. I want 5 to come out. So how do we peel back the layers of that object? Well, I'm going to say, okay, we start with weather data. We always start with the outer layer of the onion, and then we peel back. We go, all right, I want to get to Syracuse before I can get to the precipitation. So I'm going to say weather data dot Syracuse. I'm going to save that. I come back over to my browser and I see this entire object. If I don't see that object, I'm not peeling back the layers of the onion right. I need to stop there and test. figure out why it's not working. If it is working, I go, all right, now I want to go a level deeper. I want to hit the precipitation. So I do dot precipitation, and I get 95 out. Great. Now I want to practice again. Now I'm going for San Francisco. So I go weather data dot San Francisco, and immediately I notice I got red squigglies going on. If I save that and look at my browser, I get this weird missing parenthesis after argument list. I'm like, all right, what's going on there? What is the console trying to tell me here? It's telling me I have a problem on line 10. So whenever you see this file name, a colon, and a number, that is the line number. It's trying to give you a hint. Oftentimes, error messages are either on that line number, which is the case in this situation, or they're on the line above it that is causing the problem. Here, just like we need to put it in quotes because there is a space in it, we cannot use dot notation because there is a space in San Francisco. So instead of using dot notation, we have to switch over to bracket notation here. So instead of using a dot, we peel the layer of the onion back using the bracket. We save, we come over here, we see that entire object come out, and then we are able to access something like the wind speed in San Francisco, which comes out as 15 miles an hour by using our dot notation again. So we can intermix dot notation and bracket notation. If we wanted to, we could use another bracket here, and this would work exactly the same way. So bracket notation and dot notation are intermixable. We prefer to use dot notation just because it's less characters. We don't have to use the bracket in the string. We can just use a dot instead. However, the two times that we need to use bracket notation are one, if we are using a key that has a space in it, or two, we want to use what we call a dynamic variable to access that. So what if I want to say const data to get equals temperature? Well, because I'm using bracket notation, I could say dot temperature here. And of course, we would get out 72, the temperature in San Francisco. But I could also use the bracket here and say data to get. Because data to get is not in quotes here, it knows, oh, I need to go find a variable called data to get. I see that data to get is asking for the temperature, so I can drop that into my brackets here and access that right here. So if I say data to get in quotes, it is going to tell me undefined because there is no key in this object called data to get. But if I leave out the quotes, it now knows, oh, go find the variable data to get. That has a value of temperature. Drop that into the brackets here, access the temperature right here, get 72, and that is what we see coming out from line 13, which of course matches our console.log right here. Okay, with all of that said, does anyone have questions about objects? Hopefully a quick little overview. Any questions there about what we've practiced so far?
This kind of reminded me of that one other thing we did with the, I think it was like, what's it like, the school and the elementary. Yeah, I'm getting kind of like the same
Absolutely.
from that.
Yep. Both were using an object. I think we had arrays in there, which we aren't using in this example, but just practicing with this, because when you get into the New York Times project, which is kind of your midterm project, you will see the data is so nested because you're getting all the bestsellers back. But all of the bestsellers books they're sorted into different lists. There's different data about that book, like the price and where you can find it on Amazon and the category and the author. all of that is in a list of all the different books that are out there. There are IDs, there are different data types. So we're just practicing here saying, hey, when we get into nested data, we got to take this one step at a time. We got to keep on peeling back. We don't just pick something nested all the way down and shoot for it. Instead, we want to just console log each layer that we go in to make sure that we can access it. Okay, now that we've got this, the goal here is to get the data that we're storing here to reflect in the interface here. But we want to give our users the option of picking what data they would like to see. So what we need to do is modify our index.html here to change this into a dropdown. So we're going to find where that Manlius, New York is in our code. That is showing up here as a span. And what we're going to do is we're going to change that to a select instead. So I'm going to say, hey, we're going to do a big select here. And we want 3 options to show up. We would like an option to show up that says Manlius, New York, 13104. We would like an option to show up that says Syracuse, New York, 13202. And we would like an option of San Francisco to show up of 94109. Yes, I'm aware cities have multiple zip codes. We're just using those. Check over in my browser. I've got my select showing up. I'm feeling pretty good about that. The only thing that I don't like is that this is now left aligned, and I would like to right align it. Could we go to our CSS and right align it? Absolutely. Is that where we should be doing it? Yes. Where are we going to do it instead? In our JavaScript, so we can get a little practice with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the end of my JavaScript file, and I'm going to say const location select is equal to document.getElementById, and I'm going to get my location. Now, if I save this and look in my browser and console log out my location select, I see that it is null. Why is it null? Because when I got the element by ID location, I don't have any element that has an ID of location. I need to go up into my HTML and on my select, add an ID of location. Now that I have done that, I can now see my select location showing in my console. Now that I've got my location select, I can say location select dot style. And what style do I want to modify? Well, I want to modify my text align. Now you'll notice if we did this in our HTML, it would be text dash align. But in JavaScript, the document object model converts our dashes, our snake case, almost snake case, to camel case instead. So instead of putting a dash here, I have a capital A. The document object model is doing that conversion for us in the model. And what do I want to set that to? I want to set that to right. Have to do it as a string because right is not a variable. It is literally saying, hey, I would like that to be right aligned. And you will see now over on the dropdown that we have our right aligned text. Pause there, give you a second to catch up. You do not have right aligned text. Now is your time to raise your hand and ask your question or try and debug. Everyone good? Anyone have a question? Yes, Terry.
So when I'm doing my inspect element on my browser, why it keeps saying fave what is that fave con dot ICO, it keeps saying not found. I don't know why it keeps saying that.
Yeah, is that sometimes it is a browser extension that is trying to load it. The fave icon is basically something that we can add into our head up here into our metadata, where we can basically specify what icon shows up right here. Because we don't have a favicon loaded, it is throwing it out in the browser of like, hey, heads up, you just loaded a page without a favicon or favicon. I've heard it pronounced both ways. That's okay. You can ignore that. That's not going to impact your JavaScript or anything really in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then the only other thing that you may see in your console that's not in mine is if you have browser extensions installed, they love to throw things in the console. Just take a look at what's over on the right-hand side here, and you'll see it will start with Chrome extension / and something. That's just an extension trying to do something that we can also ignore. Any other questions? Anyone not have their text right aligned? Again, we normally wouldn't do this in our JavaScript. Normally, we would do this in our CSS. We tried to keep our JavaScript only for user interactivity at the moment. That changes a little bit when we get into React. But for the example of class of showing how we can reach in and access all of that, that is what, just as an example, we're going to do it in our JavaScript. But normally that would be preferred to be in our CSS. Okay. Now we get to the user interactivity part of things. Before we do, let's take attendance. Tonight, the secret word is San Francisco.
You said the secret word is Costco's?
San Francisco.
Yeah, no, I was just messing with you.
Now I want to go to Costco's.
Ironically, or interestingly enough, just bought a membership yesterday to Costco.
Welcome to the club, brother.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Feel like
enjoy
I'm
the
ready
chicken
to be
bake.
indoctrinated with the pizza.
Yep, it's worth it. You may
Pizza's
be asking where
gross.
your money went.
That pizza's not great, but the gas and the free air is always a plus.
Free air is good to know. The gas doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot you got Tesla. That's not. But yeah, the free air is cool.
All right. Now we get to user interactivity of everything. So I've got this drop down. I'm trying to make it so when I click on an item here, this data will update based off of the object that I have up here. So what I first need to do is attach a listener. And we've kind of seen listeners a couple different ways. Everyone is completely acceptable. We could come in here and change our select to be an on change. An on change is a little different than an on click. An on change is saying, hey, we don't really care when they click on the select. What we care about is when they change one of the options here. So we could do the on change added as an attribute to the select. We've also seen that we can do location select dot on change and make that equal to a function. But there is a more kind of formal method in the document object model that allows us to do that. What we can do is we can say location select dot add event listener. add event listener is a function that is built into the document object model.
Your screen isn't shared.
Yes, it is.
Oh, I guess I just probably did something on my end.
Okay. An add event listener is the first function that we are working with that takes 2 parameters. Woohoo! Let's get crazy. Okay. The first parameter is a string, and we are going to say change. That is the event type that we are listening for. Again, events can be scroll events, they can be click events, they can be hover events. We are going to do a change event. Change events are most commonly used on form elements, like a select or an input or a text area or anything like that. And then we've got to tell it what we want it to do. So we're going to say event and make a new function. And before we get too far, we're just going to console.log location changed. Oh, that's a semicolon at the end. We go ahead and save that. We come back over to our code. We change Manlius to San Francisco, and we should get location changed coming out. Break down the syntax here. Location select is a variable that we defined as the get element by ID location. Add event listener is a method or a function that is built into the document object model. Change is the first parameter that we're using, so it knows what event type we want to listen to. We define a new function using an arrow function syntax. We put parentheses here because those are the parameters coming into the function. We put curly braces here to make a new block of code to say, hey, this is all the lines of code that I would like to run when that change event happens. Then we get into our console log, another built-in function that is saying, hey, log out this string. Don't actually pay attention to this. It's not a variable. All we're doing is we want the literal string of letters to come out, location changed. We finish off the curly brace to close our function. We finish off our parenthesis to close out the add event listener. This is the first time that we have seen a function nested inside another function that we are calling right here. And again, we go to test it by changing the location and making sure that we see location change coming out in the console. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Next thing we need to know is, well, what did they change it to? In order to know what data we want to show from this object, we need to know what they changed it to. Terry.
So I remember you saying with the style select that style we don't do that with normally want to do that with JavaScript, right?
Yes. Normally we
So-
would just do this in our CSS.
So would it be okay for me to add that but like comment it on my like CSS?
Yeah, it's totally fine.
Okay.
You could add it to your CSS and still have it do it here, and as long as they're the same property, it wouldn't matter.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want to break anything.
No, you're good. The JavaScript will override your CSS because your JavaScript runs after your CSS loads. But if they're the same property, the browser is going to be like, well, it's already text align right, so I'm just going to ignore that. Okay, now we need to know what they changed it to. Well, remember with our event that we have here, we can get access to the target of what the event happened on. And because we get access to the target, we can get access to the value of that target. So we're going to say const selected location is equal to our event.target.value. The location select here, Safi, is coming from our document get element by ID location. So we are just storing it in location select and then adding the event listener to the location select, which is the element by ID location, which is linking into the select here. So we could replace location select with document.getElement by ID location, and it would work the exact same way. And of course, we can name this whatever as long as we're consistent
you.
with it. Of course. Okay, now to test to see if this is working, we are going to console log out our selected location. So I save that, I come over here, I click on Syracuse, and now you see I see Syracuse in the console. I change Syracuse to San Francisco, and now I see San Francisco.
Wait, so we use the target to get the value of the options?
Yes, the value that was selected. So the event is, hey, they changed the dropdown. The target is the actual select input that the event happened on. And then the value is an HTML property in the document object model that we are able to get out the value of that select. Anyone not have their selected location in their console? Okay. Now I need to match this selected location up with whatever city is in my weather data, right? So I want to say, hey, because I picked San Francisco, this is the data that I'm trying to retrieve. So in order to do that, I'm going to say const matching data is equal to my weather data. So I'm accessing this object up here, and I want to use the selected location. Now, if I said, pause here, don't follow me. If I said dot selected location and log out my matching data, when I pick San Francisco, it's going to say undefined. Because I used dot notation, it is literally looking for the word selected location, and it's going, Manlius, Syracuse, and San Francisco are not a selected location. What do you want me to do there? So instead, I need to use bracket notation. When I use bracket notation without the quotes, it's going to say, oh, selected location is coming from the event target value. Well, I'm going to do that. I come over here, I pick San Francisco, and I still get undefined. And I'm like, well, what's going on? I picked Syracuse. So again, if I look at that console log selected location and pick Syracuse, I get Syracuse, New York 13202. Well, now we have a problem. Because look at what is in my weather data. It's just the word Syracuse. It is not Syracuse, New York 13202. So I'm like, crap, how do I solve this? Because I want that full string to show up for the user. Well, it turns out in our HTML, we can actually set a value for each of these options that the computer will use under the hood, but still display to the user the full string. What I'm able to do is in these options, I'm able to add a value attribute. So for the value, I'm going to say Manlius. Oops. Value equals Syracuse, and value equals San Francisco. Now, when I save that and come back over to my browser, when I pick San Francisco, you will see I get the San Francisco object showing in my console. So this is a good example that we can solve our JavaScript issues by working in our HTML. again, this is a browser-based function that says I'm allowed to add properties to my HTML attributes, and then I'm able to retrieve that dot value because I have set those values up here. Again, we need to be very careful on our spelling. The 3 values that we're using here need to match the 3 spellings that we use right here. Okay, now that we've got that, we can start working with our matching data. Because we've peeled back the layer of the onion to get just one specific thing, we are able to start working with the data here. So what we can do is we can say, hey, document.getElementById, and we're going to start with temperature. So I scroll up in my HTML and I find where we have the current temp. Current temp already has an ID on it, so we can reuse that. We can say get element by ID current temp and set the inner, if I can spell, the inner HTML of that equal to, what do I want to set it equal to? Well, we already did the work to get the selected location out of the weather data. So if we look at the weather data, I have already layered into this object here. So now I can target the temperature directly. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and say matching data dot temperature. I save that, I come over, I pick another location and look at what changed. My temperature has now changed. We can then repeat that. You can say, hey, go get another element. The other element we want to get is the precipitation. However, the precipitation doesn't have an ID on it yet. There's no way for us to target just that one section. So instead, what we can do is we can put this in a span with an ID of precipitation. Now that we've got that in a span, we are able to say get element by ID precipitation and set that to the precipitation that is coming from our object right here. I save that, I come over, I now change my drop-down selection, and now I've got precipitation 5. There are 2 ways of fixing that because I did have a lovely percent here. I could take that percent and move it outside of the span, or I could use string concatenation. I can say, go get the matching data precipitation and add on to the end of it a little percent sign. I save that, I come over, I change my dropdown, and now I get my percent sign showing. And the last thing we need to do, we can document get element by ID, target the wind speed. So I'll do a span with an ID of wind. Added that span up here, come down here, get element by ID wind, and set that inner HTML equal to my matching data dot wind. I save, I come over here, I change my drop down to Syracuse, and now my wind and my precipitation update, and I can change it to Manlius and get those values as well. leave this on the screen for you to catch up. Don't forget, these do not work if we don't add these spans up here. In order for us to be able to reach in from our JavaScript to update the values, we create these spans up here so the JavaScript has something to reach into to grab. Anyone have questions on any of that? The percent symbol doesn't carry over because the percent symbol is inside the span when the page first loads, right? So if we look at this, the percent symbol is already in there. However, if we look at our data for the precipitation, it's just a number, right? It's 55 or 95. The percent isn't there. So we couldn't turn these into a string and add the percent sign there, but we don't always have control over our data. When we get into the API may send in a number without that percent sign. So in that case, we can't modify the data. The data is just getting sent in. So instead, what we can do is we can concatenate the percent sign there, or we could also go up to the span and take the percent sign out of the span, put it on the other side of it, and that would also fix the problem. Multiple ways of solving that. Yeah. So we have a question on const matching data, weather data, selected location. I think this is a good one to kind of draw through how it's working. So we are going to, let me get my screen set up right. Okay. So we start by saying document get element by ID location. That is going to grab this entire select right here. That then connects in here and stores it into location select. We then take location select and we add an event listener called change. That is going to say, hey, when the select is changed to a different option, we would like this JavaScript function to run. What would we like to do? Well, when that event happens, which we access right here, go to the target of the event, which again is this entire select up here, and get the value of it. That value is going to be Syracuse because I changed it to Syracuse in the dropdown. We then store that value into the selected location. So this value, again, is going to be Syracuse from up here. We then log it out to make sure that we are able to access that value properly. Because we are, we then take that selected location from right here and we drop it into right here. So this entire, because we are using bracket syntax without the quotes, this entire value now becomes Syracuse. Okay, so Syracuse is going into the weather data. Where is the weather data coming from? The weather data is coming up here and grabbing Syracuse. That means that this entire object, all of the weather data related to Syracuse, is now stored in a variable called matching data. Well, how can we prove that? If we console log out the matching data, we will see that when we pick Syracuse, we get the Syracuse data, and when we change that to San Francisco, we get the San Francisco data. So this is what we call a dynamic key. We're using a variable, which happens to be coming from the value of the target of the event, which is the dropdown, basically, to say whatever the user selected, go find that matching value in the weather data object using the key that the user selected from the value of the dropdown. We left out all kinds of data. We left out the conditions here. We left out humidity. We left out all of this down here. That's okay. I think there may even be an optional assignment that has you practice and add in some of that data. But just for the sake of time, we left it out.
I was just, it was bothering me a little bit, but it's good.
Yeah, you can practice. You can add that key in if you want, and then write the document get element via D to update it.
We don't need
Seems-
no more humidity in our lives at all, man. We just leave that out.
This is a good time for break. When we come back, we're going to update this time here so that we can actually have a live dynamic time showing up. We're also going to work on converting this into a named function instead of what we call an anonymous function, so that when the page first loads, the data is matching the data that comes in from the object. So go on break, be back at 7:20, and we will continue on with this project.
I'm getting an undefined on my participation, but I'm gonna try to debug on my own.
Okay. If you're still having the problem after break, raise your hand and we'll dive in.
Okay.
Apologies in advance if you were watching the YouTube video from yesterday. The format was a little different because I accidentally recorded it to my computer instead of the cloud. So if you noticed any difference, that's probably why. But back to our regularly scheduled programming. Okay, so where did we leave off? We've got this drop down working, which is pretty cool. Two things that I would like to fix. When we first load the page, apparently it is 48 degrees. But when we come up here, we see that the temperature is 65. Well, why is that happening? In order to understand that, we got to read through what's happening here. So we start with this HTML, right? We load in all of this data and look at what the first temperature is that we set is 48 degrees. So how does the computer read this? It first loads all of this data in via the HTML. It gets all the way down to the bottom of our page and it goes, oh crap, we've got some JavaScript we got to run here. So we go over to our JavaScript and we start all the way at the top. So it console logs JS linked, and we see the JS linked here. Then it goes, okay, this data is just an object. It's just a variable. You're not asking me to do anything with it. You're just asking me to remember it. And remember, that's how functions work as well. Functions are just stored in variables. So a function won't run until we ask it to run. So this data is just sitting out here. Then we ask it to log out the Syracuse precipitation. And so it does that right here, 95. Then it goes, all right, new variable, temperature, I'm going to store that. Oh, you would like me to go to weather data, which is up here, San Francisco, which is right here, and then data to get. Data to get is a dynamic key. It is not in quotes. So let me go remember what data to get is. Data to get is temperature. Okay, you would like me to get the temperature in San Francisco from the weather data object. We do that, we log out 72. Now it comes in and it goes, oh, document, you want me to go into the HTML and go get location. I will go do that. That is a select. I'm going to store that in location select. I'm going to log it out. Oh, you would like me to text align it right. Okay, I will do that. That's why when we first load this page, this is over text aligned right. Then it goes, hey, I would like to add an event listener when a change happens. And the browser goes, okay, I will listen for that event, but I ain't going to do jack shit until that event actually happens. Now it reaches the bottom of the page. It ignores all of this code because that code is in a function and it is done. Then we go in as a user and change this input. When we change the input, it goes, oh, there was an event listener for a change. A change just happened. Now I need to go run the code inside this function. We have not named this function. This is what we call an anonymous function because it is just something that we said, hey, this is the function to run when this event happens. So it logs out location changed. We see that right here. Then it gets the value. Then it uses that selected location, to go back into our weather data. It pulls out the matching data, the one city that we actually care about. It reaches into the temperature, the precipitation, and the wind, then goes into the document object model and updates all of this information. Well, it's kind of really confusing to a user. They load this and they go, oh, it's 48 degrees in Manlius. They come to this dropdown, they check Syracuse, they go back to Manlius. Why all of a sudden is it 65 degrees? The problem that we have is we asked it to load this data in based off of the change event. But really what we want to happen is this data to load when the page first loads in. So don't follow me quite yet. We could fix this by taking all of this code, copying it. Again, don't follow me on this yet. Pasting it in here and saying, hey, the selected location, when the page first loads, is Manlius. Now, because we moved it outside of the event listener, it reaches down to the bottom of the page here and goes, oh, when this script first loads, it needs to set all of this data. So now when we refresh, we get 65 as the temperature in Manlius because the temperature is out here. But now we've got a different problem. We just broke the DRY, don't repeat yourself rule. This code isn't dry because we just duplicated all of this code. What JavaScript concept can we use in order to not repeat all of this code, but have it run when the page first loads and when a event fires?
A loop?
You don't want to loop it because we only want it to happen when the event fires or when the page first loads. What
Could
other
we,
job?
I'm sorry. Could we use a like, might be wrong, but could we use a conditional?
A conditional, not quite, right? Because we want to, there's no if the page first loads, else when the event happens. We don't quite want a conditional. How do we write reusable code in JavaScript?
Using a function, right?
Using a function. And we are technically using a function here already. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this out into its own function. We're going to say const update data is equal to a new function. And what we're going to do is take all of this code. We're actually going to jump down to the matching data. We're going to take this code out and paste it into our update data. Now you can follow along. Sorry, I should have said resume. If you are coding along, you can code along with this. We make this new function called update data. And what we did, we left the selected location code here for just a minute. We then moved our update data to use the matching data based off of the selected location and all of that. So I save this, and now we just broke our website, because if I come over here and refresh and click on Syracuse, nothing happens, right? It does log out location change San Francisco, but our data is still broken here. This is a case where we have to take one step forward to take two steps, one step backwards to take two steps forward. We need to break this so that the code is in its right spot so that we can take that two steps forward. What we can do here is say, hey, on location change, add the event listener, get the selected location, but what I would like to do is update the data. The problem is that update data is going to run differently based off of the selected location. So this is for the first time where we are seeing, one, where we define our own named function, but two, we're able to see arguments and parameters. A parameter in a function is saying, hey, based off of the data I'm sending into you, I would like you to behave differently. So up here, we're going to, in our parentheses, say, hey, the selected location is going to get sent into this function. Then we are going to take that when we call the update data, we are going to call the function and give it the argument of selected location. So what did we do? We said add the event listener on the change. The change is going to get out the value and store that as selected location. Then we are going to call this function called update data, which is going to take the selected location from the event target value and send it into the parameter called selected location here. So it's an argument when we call the function, it's a parameter when the function is expecting that data to get sent in. The two are often used interchangeably. Don't get too wrapped up in it. Just when we call the function, it's an argument. When we define the function, when we tell the function what data is coming in, it is called a parameter. We then take that selected location to go up to the weather data, pull out the appropriate object, and then update everything here. What that allows us to do is save. We come over, we test. I'm going to change it to Syracuse. My dropdown changes. But now what I am able to do is say, hey, update data and update that based off of Manlius. Why Manlius? Because it's the first value in our dropdown. So now when we refresh the page, we see the temperature is 65. Okay, now seems like a good time to do a review. So, you know what? Before I do that, I'm curious. Go ahead and vote in the poll.
Oh man, this is a real trick question.
I want to make sure that this is helpful to people because it's I know it takes a lot of class time. The poll, half of you have voted. Okay. That gives me a little validation. Thank you. All right. So let's go through this like the computer does. First thing is it loads in the style sheet. Okay, we don't need to dive into that. The second thing it does is loads the HTML. Oh, number one. Loads the HTML based on the contents in the HTML file alone. So it's going to show all of this data, including number two, shows Manlius as the first location because it's the first option. Okay, we come down, it gets all the way down to the bottom. It hits all the way down to the script and says number 3, execute JavaScript. So we switch over to our JavaScript and we say for log linked, so we know our script tag is working. Store the weather data in an object that has keys for each of our locations. Log out the precip in Syracuse. So we have practice accessing nested keys and values. Make a new variable and store the string temp in it. Practice using a dynamic key and a key with a space in it to get the data we want. Reach into the HTML using the document object model and store the select dropdown in a JS variable. Log number 9 so we know it's working. Set the CSS text align property for practice using the document object model. Create a function called update data, but don't run it yet. Remember, functions don't run until we call them or some event does trigger them. So we skip all the way down here to 13. Use number 9 to attach an event listener when the select changes. Then we come down and we go number 14. Call the function from number 12. When we say call, we mean execute, run, go do this thing. Call the function from number 12, sending the first location, manlius, into the function's parameters as an argument. Okay, the parentheses here now are telling it, I want you to go run that function, go update that data. So we come up to all the way up to update data, and now we dive in here and we say number 15, retrieve the selected city using the argument sent in from number 14. So we're saying manlius comes in here, gets stored in selected location. Selected location now goes, oh, that's a variable using bracket notation. I need to go up and get manlius. So what it really does is 16, take the object associated with manlius and store it in number 15 matching data. So we take this entire object and shove it into our matching data right here. Then we say 16, update all three HTML elements using the data from number 15. So we go into the object, we get out those three things, we put it inside the inner HTML using the document object model. That comes back up here and updates the data in here. Okay, now it's done and we think we're finished, but we have all of this down here. So we get into 17. User changes the dropdown. So this function runs. We log out the location changed. We 18 get the selected value from the event's target. Log it to make sure it's what we expect. And then finally, 20, call the update function using the argument from number 18. Then we come back in here and say 21, run the function as called from number 20. And then it goes through 15, 16 again and updates all of the data. This time, the selected location isn't coming from the string manlius. Instead, this time, the location is coming from the event target value, which is stored as selected location, which we pass in right here. All right, how are we feeling? Do we have questions about that so far? All right. I am going to show you 2 more features that we can add to this. And then I'm going to give you a stump the teacher moment where you can ask, how would I do this on this page? And we will figure it out together. The 2 things that I would like to show you is this time is just totally made up. I would like that time and date to dynamically update. And I think we can get fun and say, hey, I'd like a random weather condition to be picked for right here and have that update on the page. So to get started, I'm going completely off the book here. I do not have any reference code, so stick with me as we work on this. I know that there is something, and I'm going to do this on the update data, so it runs not only when the page updates, I'm sorry, not only when the page loads, but also when the user picks a new dropdown. So I know there's something called date, and I can say new date here, and console log out that date and get the current date and time. So I go, all right, Thursday, May 20th, or May 30th, 1900. All right, let's work with that. So if I take that and I say, hey, I'm going to head to my date right here. I'm going to put it in a span with an ID of current time. And I'm going to move that in here. I should be able to, inside my current, my updated data, say document, get element by ID, current time, and set the inner HTML of that equal to now. So I save that, and now I get this giant thing coming out. And I'm like, okay, well, that is technically now, but that's a little bit more than what I wanted, right? So this is a really good example of saying, okay, I now need to either Google this or ask ChatGPT to help me. So I can say JS format date. And the first thing that comes up is MDM. And it tells us that there are some functions in here, like get full year, get month, get date. Okay, well, that's kind of helpful. What I can do is say, all right, I want the day of the week. So that's get day. So I'm now going to say now dot get day. And that gives me 4. And I'm like, okay, why is that 4? Well, if we start with the day of the week being Monday, 4 is Thursday, right? It's the 4th day of the week. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not really helpful. So what we can do is we can come down and start seeing there are some other ways to format a date. One says to locale date string. Okay, well, let's see what that looks like. I can say .to locale string, and now I get 5/30 2024 7:43 and I'm like, okay, it's a step in the right direction, but maybe a little bit more than what I wanted. So we could keep on digging into the documentation here, or we could head to ChatGPT and say, using JavaScript, return the date in the format with the day of the week and the current time using 12 hours instead of 24-hour. Okay, so we get a lot here. Let's break it down. What problem did we have with the getDay function? The getDay function returned the day of the week as a number. We wanted it as a string. And so what did ChatGPT do for us? It solved that by defining all of the days of the week. It made our new date and called it now, just like we did. And then it said, hey, go get the day of the week as a number and use that index as an array. So the day of the week came out as 4. What does 4 come out as? Sunday is 0, Monday is 1, Tuesday is 2, Wednesday, Thursday. So now it's saying get day of the week as a number, which is 4. Go to the days of the week array, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now go get Thursday. Great. Now what else did it do? It got out the hours, minutes, and seconds and stored them all in their own variables. Then it said, hey, if the hours is greater than 12, because the JavaScript system is always going to return hours in military time, in 24-hour time. So it said if the hours is greater than 12, it must be in the PM. Otherwise, it's the AM. This is what we call a ternary operator. It's like an inline if statement. It says if whatever is true on the left side of the question mark, then use this. But if whatever is here that is not true, use what is on the right side of the colon. So that's, it's again called a ternary operator, ternary. It's basically a way of writing an inline if statement. Then it comes down and says, hey, the problem with minutes and seconds is that if it is 0, 5 seconds, it's just going to return 5. And we don't want it to return 5. We want it to return 0, 5. So it reuses these ternary operators and says, hey, if the minutes is less than 10, use a 0 and then concatenate the minutes. Otherwise, just use the minutes here. Then take that formatted time based off of all of the variables here and use what we call a template literal. This is basically another way of doing string concatenation. We're going to get into template literals in the next project. So hold off on doing a deep dive there. Then finally, return the day of the week and the formatted time. Okay, this is all pretty cool. And it does explain all of this to you of, hey, these are all of the steps that we take. But what we are able to do is copy this, go into our own code, paste it, and it is using a function. And I don't like the older style of functions. I could ask ChatGPT, hey, please write this as an arrow function, but good to be able to do it ourselves, right? So I'm going to say const get formatted date is equal to this function. I am able to now save that. And when I come back up, instead of doing this date and saying, hey, do it as a to-locale string, I am able to just call that function. I'm able to say get formatted date. Get formatted date is going to come down here. It's going to go, oh, this function, go do all of this work here. We save, we come over, we take a look at our weather, we refresh, and we get Thursday with the time. Now, I could go to ChatGPT and say, please remove the seconds, or we could do that ourselves, right? We could say, hey, we don't want the seconds to show up there. We take that little part of the snippet out, and now we get our day of the week. Hopefully an example of using ChatGPT to our advantage. Of course, we could look up any one of these functions, and if we didn't understand what getDay was doing, we can actually hover over it, and if we hold in command and click on it, nope, just kidding. I thought it linked to the MDM documentation. I guess it does not. So we can always look that up. We can always say JS get date or get day. And see the breakdown of all of this of it returning Sunday through Saturday as 0 through 6. We log it out, we get whatever day of the week August 19th was. So we can always use that documentation, but we can also say, hey, I've got an end goal in mind. If we structure our query right in ChatGPT and make sure we always include what programming language we want it to be done in, it will generate that out for us. Okay, any questions on the day of the week?
I was gonna say, how did you implement seconds again? I know you said you removed that feature.
Yeah, so down here, the formatted time is what we call a template literal. And we're gonna get more into template literals. It's basically a fancier way of doing string concatenation. Excuse me, but the original function had str seconds right here, and I didn't want the seconds to be included anymore. So what I did is I just took out that string seconds right here, and that solved the problem for me.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, one last thing I want to show you guys. I would like this to be randomly generated, right? So I would like to define a bunch of different conditions, and based off of whenever we pick that data, I want it to pick another random one. So I'm going to come up to our update data function, and I'm going to say const conditions. And because there are a list of different conditions, I want to do this as an array. So my array is going to have cloudy, it's going to have sunny, it's going to have raining, foggy, hazy, hailing, and tornado. You laugh, but the weather API that we will be using in a couple weeks actually does have tornado as a weather condition. When we built our weather integration into our conversational platform at work, we had to list out all the different expected responses and then say, oh, it looks like it's a beautiful sunny day, or don't forget an umbrella, it looks like it's raining outside. And then we actually had to implement one that says, if the current weather condition is tornado, please stop talking to me and go seek shelter. So seems like a crazy condition, but we do have to handle that. Okay. Now from that conditions array, we want to pick a random one, right? Just as an example of what we can do in JavaScript. Well, there is a function called math.random. The kind of weird thing, though, is when we use math.random, it returns a decimal number. Believe it or not, there is no way in JavaScript to say pick a random number between this and this. So if I refresh this, you'll see it is a random decimal number between 0 and 1 every time, but there's no way for us to say, hey, go pick a random number between this and this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to ChatGPT. I'm going to create a new conversation here, right? Because if we do this based off of this current thread, it would probably work, but it's going to be thinking in the context of a date, right? So it would be like coming to me and being like, hey, we were just talking all about dates. Pick a random number. And I'm like, a random date? A random number? Like, what are you talking about, right? So we want to give ChatGPT the benefit of the doubt. We're going to start a new chat, and I'm going to say, write JS code that picks a random element from an array. Okay, and before we take any code, we always want to make sure that we understand it, right? ChatGPT is giving us an explanation, but we want to dive into that a little bit more. And I just saw a question in the chat. I will circle back to that. So function get random element. Okay, we're defining a function that we can reuse, and it says if the array length is 0. If the array is basically empty, return undefined, because if we try to access a random element in that array and there's nothing in the array, we're going to get an error. So handle this, have a conditional that says if the array is empty, just return undefined because there's just nothing in the array. But if the array is not empty, come down and get a random index. Okay, how do we get the random index? We do use that math.random, which we saw before, but we're multiplying it by the number of items in the array. Then we are flooring it. Floor is kind of like rounding, except it just truncates off that decimal. So if our random number is 0.5, and we have 5 different conditions in the array, it's going to say 0.5 times 5. That gives us what, 2.5? Then it truncates off the 0.5 and says your random index is now 2. So go access the array. Where is the array coming from? The array is coming from the parameters up here. That parameter is getting sent in from our get random element right here, which is accessing the array, which we defined right here. So I am able to take this whole function, copy it, come back into my JavaScript, paste it in, and say const get random element is going to be an arrow function. And what I'm able to do now is say, hey, document get element by ID. We are going to target the span ID of conditions. And what we are able to do is say get element by ID conditions and set the inner HTML equal to our get random element from our conditions array. I save, I come over, I refresh, and great, there's a tornado apparently in Manlius. And if I change that to Syracuse, I get that it's cloudy. If I change it back to Manlius, I get that it is now hazy out. Or I circle back to that template literal. Any questions on our get random element conditions? Anyone want me to talk through that one more time?
Yeah, one more time, please.
Yeah. So JavaScript has a problem that we cannot, there's no function built into JavaScript that picks a random item from an array, and there's no way to say pick a random number between this and this. So what we do is we make a new function that says get random element. Get random element takes the array, so it knows how many items we're working with. We do a conditional check to make sure that the array isn't empty, because if it is empty and we try and access an item in it, we're going to get a different error. So we check to see if it is empty. If it is empty, return undefined, basically saying I can't pick a random element when there's no definition of what's in that array. Then we do some JavaScript hackiness to come up with a random number that is based off of the number of elements that is in the array. So math.random is going to create a random number between 0 and 1, basically a random decimal number. We multiply that by the number of items that is in the array, so we know how big of a random number are we trying to generate. And then we floor that number. We basically say truncate out the decimal. We don't care about the decimal number. We're looking for a whole number. That is going to generate a random index based off of the number of items that is in the array. Then we take that random number somewhere between 0 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we take that random number, again, 0 through 6, access that that value in the array, that index, the value of the index in that array. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's what we return out. This function doesn't do diddly squat until we call it. So when do we call it? We call it whenever update data is called. When do we call update data? Not only in the here on the on change, we also call it all the way down at the bottom of the page to say when this JavaScript first runs, update the data. Okay. Page loads in, the HTML loads, it defaults to cloudy because that's what we have in our HTML. We trace that all the way through. We get down to the bottom here. It says update data based off of manliness. We come up to our update data. Update data has manliness as the selected location. We do all of the work based off of the object. We define our array called conditions, so it knows what to pick through. Then it goes, okay, go get the conditions in the HTML, update the inner HTML. What do we want to set it to? We want to set it to whatever comes out of get random element. How does get random element work? It needs the array of conditions that we defined right here. So we pass that into our get random element. It does all of the work. It finds the random index. It returns out the item that is at that index. We take that and use the return of that to set the inner HTML of the conditions. And that is how, whenever we refresh the page, we get a different condition here.
All right, thank you.
Questions on the random element, and then I will touch on the template literal one more time.
And you say you'll go more in depth like throughout the weeks?
Yes. We'll continue the numbering exercise and practicing with all of that. The template literal, and this is one of those things that, like, it just, if you don't get it now, don't worry, it will definitely be coming back. We can basically say const formatted time is equal to the hours, right? The variable that we defined up here, plus a colon, plus the str minutes, plus a space, plus AM or PM. And if we save that and come over here and refresh, you see our time works exactly the same way. What a template literal allows us to do is define a template that has our variable values in it. What is different about it, though, is that we can't use single quotes or double quotes, which are strings in JavaScript, and there's no difference between single quote and double quote. Instead, what we use is a backtick. So we say const formatted time, again, is equal to, and now we do a backtick. And the backtick basically says whatever I put in here is going to be treated as a string. But if we don't want it to be a string, if I say AM, PM, we see AM, PM come out here. If I don't want it to be treated as a string, if I want a variable's value to appear in that string instead, what I'm able to do is wrap this in a $ curly brace. That $ curly brace is saying, hold up, I don't actually want the letters AM, PM to show up. I want you to go get the value of AM, PM, which is literally PM or AM based off of how many hours into the day we are. So if I save that, you will see this now changes to PM. So what this allows us to do is say, instead of the word example, I want the hours to show up there with a space and then AM, PM. Now we get 8 PM. So what we're basically able to do is build out a colon. The colon is outside the curly braces. So it goes, oh, you actually want the colon to show up. Now I want the str minutes to show up. Because I did not put it in curly braces, it literally just shows str minutes. But if I put that in curly braces, we will now get 04 to show up. So a template literal is the exact same thing as string concatenation. And to prove that, we can actually say, does formatted time equal formatted time 2? And that comes out as true. So to the computer, this and this are absolutely identical. It's just two different ways of writing that string out. One using concatenation, the other one using the $ curly braces to basically drop the values of that variable in. We will see template literals down the road come back time and time again. It's just a quicker way of writing concatenation without having to put a bunch of different plus signs, basically.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, how are we feeling? Is there any part, I'm going to give you guys 60 seconds, scroll through all of this code, either on the live share or if you've been following along. Is there any point in this code where you're like, I don't get it? No, Harley, you're not allowed to say all of it. I saw the look on your face.
Can you explain what math.random is doing again?
Yeah. Math.random returns a random number between 0 and 1. So it's basically a random decimal number, and the only way that we can get any random number is by saying, give me a random number. In JavaScript, you stupidly cannot say, give me a random number between 0 and 5. It just will always give you a random number between 0 and 1, which is a decimal. So we basically say, all right, give me some random number, multiply it by the number of items that are in the array. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 items in the array. Let's say the random number that it picks is 0.5. So we would say 0.5 times the number of items in the array is 7, and that gives us 3.5. Well, obviously, there's no index at 3.5. There's an index 3 and an index 4. And so what that does, the math.floor, it says truncate out the decimal and just pick 3. So what this code allows us to do is pick a random number, 0.999 gives us 6.993. We'll truncate the decimal. That would give us 6. Index 6 is going to be the tornado. If we go all the way down to 0.0001, that gives us 0.0007. Truncate out the decimal, that's 0, and that would give us our cloudy.
Now, how is it picking a random number between 0 and 1? Or is that 2 in the weeds?
It's just the built-in JavaScript function. I'm sure that I know there is all kinds of science between computers never truly being able to pick a random number. But math.random it's kind of like asking, how does console.log know to log out to the console? That's just a built-in JavaScript function. Or another good example of that is, how does new date know what time it is? Again, that's built into like the JavaScript engine. So yes, a little in the weeds, but something that you can kind of pull the thread on through MDN. So if you look up math.random MDN, it will actually dive into, it doesn't use a cryptographically secure random number, and you can start diving into the standard of what kind of number it returns. And I think that the actual answer, so you can get into using an implementation defined algorithm or strategy. And then you can, really pull the thread on this and figure out how it's done. I do think the actual answer is it depends on the browser, or I should say the JavaScript engine that's executing the JavaScript. So math.random in Node may be different than math.random in Chrome, which is different than math.random in Firefox. But I'm sure you could pull the thread on that and actually get down to, hey, Chrome is open source. In the Blink engine, no, Blink's their HTML engine. In V8, I think it's V8, what how is math.random implemented, and then you get into math that goes way over my head. Other questions? Okay. Reminder that attendance does require your camera to be on for the majority of class unless you have messaged me first and ask for an exception. So just a reminder, on Monday's class I will be enforcing video on a little bit more, just because it's really important for me to be able to see your faces and make sure that I have not completely lost you in terms of understanding. May have done that already, but it's a boot camp, baby. Got one speed. We are done with the covered content for tonight. To give you an idea of where we are headed for next week's class, we will be building this little movie app. And this will be a 2 to 3 day project. Takes a long time to build this out, but we are going to click on an option and it will actually show you all of the seats. We can switch to a different movie and see that the available seats change, but this data is persistent. So if we go back to the movie that we were on, it will actually show the same seats being taken. And we're going to build this out not only to generate out the entire user interface, but make it so that you can actually click on 2 different seats. You'll see that the total of seats selected is based off of what we clicked on. You'll see that the total is based off of the price of the movie in the dropdown, and you'll actually be able to check out. We won't do the actual credit card implementation, and it will mark those seats as red. And then you can go pick a different movie, come back to Citizen Kane, and see that those seats are actually taken. So that will be a 2 to 3 day project. We'll get more practice with arrays and objects. We'll be using the document object model. We'll see more template literals for the first time, or I guess tonight is technically the first time, but we'll get more practice with that. We're going to get plenty of practice with document object model and updating all of that data. We're going to talk about how to know what kinds of data types to use, all of that. So, I am going to give the last 18 minutes of class back to you. You can either choose to get the hell out of here because this is a complicated project on its own. You can choose to use this time to review the code, make sure it's syncing in, take notes, and ask about specific lines of code. You can take on a challenge and try and figure out how to structure forecast data in our weather data up here. So basically, how would I add a key called forecast that would store all of the information about the forecast, basically the second half of the app? And then once I have that data structured, how do I write the code using a loop to update all of the data down here? Take that on as a challenge, or you can use the remaining 17 minutes to say, Max, how would you do this to make something interactive in the JavaScript? With all of that said, I will not hold it against you if you are like, I am done. I've hit my saturation point. Nothing else is sinking in. At that point, have a great weekend, and I will see you all on Monday. Otherwise, I'm going to open the floor to whatever you guys choose to take it, wherever you choose to take it.
I'm just being curious. I know we have the conditions of cloudy and stuff as a constant variable, but I was thinking, would it be a mad experiment to have it be put in a random, and so it can be like randomly selected when we go through? I know when we select like Syracuse, and sorry, something was falling on me. Like Syracuse and main alias, is it possible just like it will be a random like a day to be like, let's just say, all right, Syracuse is foggy, but what if I want it the next time I click it, it can be hazy?
So it will automatically do that. If we pick Syracuse, it's sunny.
Oh,
If we go back to Manlius, it's foggy. And then if we go back to Syracuse, now it's raining. So the reason
Oh.
why it's doing that is because where we placed it, and this is a better question than you may realize. So the reason why it's doing that, where do we update the conditions in our HTML? We do it at getRandomElement. That getRandomElement is in update data. Where do we update data? We update data not only where the page first loads down here, we also do it every time the change happens on the location select. So if we didn't want it to update, if we only wanted it to update when the page first loads, we could actually take all of this, excuse me, and move it out here. Now, when we refresh the page, we get foggy, we get hazy, we get hailing. But when we change our dropdown, you will notice it is not changing in here. So where we call this getRandomElement does matter. If we call it at the bottom of the page, it will be random every time we load the page, but not random every time we change it, compared to if we call it in get updated data. If we call it here, this will happen whenever we call update data. We call update data not only at the bottom of the page, we also call it on the change.
Gotcha. Also, sorry, I had to refresh my page when you showed me that. That was my bad on my part, but seeing
Okay.
it a different way definitely shows. Hmm. But other than that, I have no other questions unless anyone else had any questions or suggestions.
Just diving deep into the rabbit hole of math.random now.
Oh, that's a maybe a flame war is the right way to describe it, because it is a very heated topic of like what algorithm it uses, and the whole cryptographically secure, like using the crypto module. It takes a lot more computational time, but then it is like a more random number. Yeah, that you can get into some real arguments over like what's the better random algorithm. And now you've reached like a level of computer science that's like, listen, dude, I just want a random number. Give me a function, and it's random enough for me, and that's fine. But
Right, but how random? How random is a deterministic number?
well, and some algorithm, some random function, some random algorithms will actually let you specify how random you want it to be, based off of how long it takes to generate it, like how computationally complex it is. So the more advanced algorithms will actually let you say how random is random.
Yeah, this is my jam.
Yeah, I tap out at that point. I'm like, don't know, don't care.
Hey, can you go back to the movie seat thing?
Mhm.
I just want to check out something.
Yeah, I can actually that I've got on the internet, so I just pasted the link in the chat and you can play around with it.
Jesus, 2 seats is $20. That's
Well,
crazy.
it depends on what movie you pick. So if you look in the drop down, it's got the price of each movie. And I just did that as an example, right? So the Godfather seats are only $8 each, but Psycho, they're $15 each.
Hey, like half the price, more than half the price of IMAX seats. IMAX is like $23.
True,
Movie
true.
Tavern actually has some deals on like movie Tuesdays, or I forget what they do. But you can get like I think it's like $8 tickets at Movie Tavern on Tuesdays at a certain time.
Now, Hollywood Theater, $2
Mm.
tickets.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's at.
You got to bring anti-stick spray though for your shoes
Yeah,
because
that is true. Hey, listen, saving a lot of money there.
Anti-stick spray.
yeah, because the floor is so sticky
It's
with all
just
the soda
coated.
that's been spilled.
Yeah, it's essentially just soda. It's not floor anymore.
So what I'm noticing about the movie seat thing is like when I like click on the seat and it shows like the numbers of seats, but what if someone be like, oh wait, I don't want 3 seats, I want like 2 seats, and then when you try to click on that same exact seat, it doesn't like.
Remember that question at the end of the project, and I will implement that for you.
Gotcha.
That's one of those projects that we got to pace it out and see how people are doing, right? Because I made that entire thing in an hour and a half, but we're gonna spend 9 hours of class time building it out. So we definitely do a lot more pacing checks on that one. We'll do a lot more of the poll of like, hey, are you done? You know, don't vote until you are. Because that's one where, again, I don't build these projects for the sake of me having fun building them. I already know how to build them, right? So this is more of we need to go at the pace of understanding, but also at the pace of it's a boot camp and we got more projects to do. So it's a good one to set a balance. Yeah, but Joe, how secure is math.pow? I'm just kidding. That's a static number, I think.
I'm reading through it. There's just so much in here. I remember when I was in 6th grade and I got into an argument with my mom, and I'm like, what am I ever going to use math for? And now I'm a math major.
To be fair, I don't use my degree at all. Well, I don't actually have a bachelor's degree. I don't use my high school diploma either.
What did you go for your bachelor's for initially?
High school, so information technology. I took 2 website design courses that I use, but every other course I don't use at all. It was more like help desk and ordering hardware for companies and they taught waterfall project management, which is almost not used at all anymore in the software industry unless you're at a much larger company that is really antiquated. So my area of study was definitely like technically adjacent, but at no point did I like take a class where I learned JavaScript or data structures or back-end development. I took a SQL course, but it was really in a vacuum because they weren't like, this is how you can run a SQL query on the back end, or like, this is how you use SQL in an API. So everything that I learned was very much, I have an app that I want to build. What do I need to learn to build that app? And I would say a good 90% of those answers came from being self-taught and finding the resources compared to, oh, I'll learn this in this course, and that's when I'll be able to build the app. So my whole education while I was in college was, I think it's dumb that we're passing around an attendance sheet. I want to build an app that allows you to check in on attendance based off of Bluetooth Low Energy beacons. So I built that. I thought it was dumb that when I got a package in the mailroom, they put a paper slip in your mailbox and then they were tracking all the packages on like an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So I built an app that would scan the barcode and then send an email to whoever the package was for to say that you've got a package ready for pickup. And then I built a shift application that was for our for the Shine Student Center, where basically they didn't staff on like 9 to 5. They staffed based off of like, this event is happening at this time, so show up an hour before and you leave an hour after. But the event schedule obviously changes pretty frequently. So I built out a whole Shift application that was based off of what promotions you had would allow you to sign up to work lights or sound or general staff or whatever. And so those were the three applications I built in college.
Did you was like the hardware level kind of like dealing with more of the physical computer science, not really your
No, I
not
didn't
really
really
your
dive
thing,
into that. Um,
or
I did
theoretical?
the shift system was initially based off of like a Raspberry Pi that had a card swipe that would let you swipe your SUID. And then I moved to the Apple calls it iBeacons, but it's all Bluetooth Low Energy. And I moved the system to that so that each professor could just have a $20 beacon instead of having like the whole computer that had to connect to the Wi-Fi network and do all of that work. But that was basically getting down to the Bluetooth Low Energy spec was as deep as I went. I didn't get into any like hardware based components other than like the Raspberry Pi that I need like an LCD screen on. So I figured out how to solder the screen on for that. But that was as deep as I went.
Yeah, that's fair. Firmware and hardware is always a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
I bought a 3D printer that had like an auto leveler on it, and it wasn't flashed correctly. So I got it, and it leveled it a tenth of a millimeter below the bed level, and then just gouged like this giant canyon through my aluminum bed plate. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had to go reflash the firmware myself, which was not posted anywhere. So I essentially had to write the firmware again.
yeah, that I draw a line there of like I prefer to get more into like the one thing that's bugging me right now is that my blinds automatically close like 15 minutes after sunset, but they close when the windows are open. And I've got an alarm system that's got contact sensors on all the windows. So now I'm like, oh, this weekend I'm probably going to write some custom code so that instead of closing at sunset, it will cross-check both APIs and pull what windows are open and then not close the blinds if that window's open. But I I mean that is obviously a hardware level, but about 15 levels of abstraction between the hardware level and the the software that's actually running. So I intentionally try to stay pretty high level.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Not that there's anything wrong with the hardware level. I mean, and lots of good jobs are available there, but it's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, at least not interacting with all, both at the same time.
Yeah.
It's way too over, for me, it's way too overwhelming.
Well, and you'll get a dash of that when you're in front end and back end, right? Where like you have to switch between HTML, JavaScript, and SQL. So there's some code switching to happen there. And one of the benefits of our stack is that front end and back end are obviously JavaScript. So it's not quite as hard as on your brain. But I remember learning Python when I first started at my job almost 10 years and how like I kept on putting semicolons in my Python code. And it was like, no, Python, like different language. Um, so something to keep in mind, kind of similar.
What module you said the look at free code care for the down? You mentioned like the rock paper scissors thing.
Yes.
Oh, I probably need to type it.
It's in the JavaScript algorithms and data structures certification. They're also, if that isn't enough for you, all the way down at the bottom in the legacy responsive web design challenges, I'm pretty sure that they will have a lot of the document object model inside of that too.
Yeah, because when I see the JavaScript algorithm, the data structure project, I see the Casper chipper telephone number validator cash cash register.
So
Yeah.
I'm in JavaScript algorithms and data. If you just do a search, Command F for DOM, you'll see the review DOM manipulation by building rock, paper, scissors.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Okay.
I will be needing that too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely be working on this one tonight.
I'm
And
with you, Terry.
The bot is back up and operational, so the video should post by, I want to say, 10:30-ish. The problem with waiting for it is it posts an SD in standard definition first, and then it does additional processing, and then it comes out in HD. So there's no, like, it's not like I upload the file separately. It's like it gets uploaded, and then YouTube takes its sweet time to process it. All right.
yeah,
Have a great
yeah.
night, everyone.
Well,
See
thank
you on Monday.
Good night.
You as well.
See ya.